Hi everyone, Nick Mitchell here. This is episode 3 of our brief series, and have to forgive me, I'm doing this intro before the intro that I did in this coming video, so you have to excuse that. It kind of seemed like it jumps around a little bit, but as you can see in this description, these are the things I'll be talking about in this episode, and hopefully we can just go ahead and jump right into this. Enjoy everyone, and sit back. You can put me on the background, because this episode is long, over an hour long. So if you want to just listen to me rant, you can just put me in the background and listen that way, or you can sit and watch, because I do have some actual flying in this video. So thanks for tuning in, and until next time. Today I'm going to be talking about a number of projects, and as I mentioned in a post earlier this week, I will be unveiling a new model conversion for air tankers. Right now, as you can see in front of me, I have the Bell 212. In the past, you've seen me doing a lot of work on the 412. Well, the 412s are getting closer to being completed, so I've decided to move some of the work over to the Bell 212s. But I've also been working on other projects in between, all the repaints I've been doing. So this is kind of one of those projects I've been doing in the background to break up the staring at the screen too long doing repaints. So today we're actually going to go fly around in the 212. Actually going to go fly up to a helibase that I actually created. And let's see, what else are we going to talk about? We're also going to talk about the DC4s. As they're getting closer to being done, I will bring up Tanker 15 so you can see it. There's going to be 10 Lavaries in that repaint pack. I don't know if anyone has seen the post that I made the other night about that. There's going to be 10 repaints in the DC4 pack, and that I'm hoping, I don't know if it's going to be done this week. It might be done next week. It depends. I have some things coming up that it's going to prevent me from probably doing a lot of work on things. So but yes, 10 repaints, and that will be for, I'll have 4 for Aero Union, excuse me, 2 for Aeroflight, 1 for Ardco, 1 for TBM, 1 for Buffalo Airways, and 1 for California National, or CalNet Aviation. That'll round out the 10 aircraft for that I'm representing in that repaint pack. The other interesting thing is that I've been sort of messing around with GMAX, a 3D design program, and I've been able to kind of roughly model some tanks. So that's what you saw on the the P-61 or the F-15 Reporter. I'll also hop into that aircraft later on in this video, and you'll be able to see it. The other aircraft that I'll be revealing later on in this video also has a rough tank on it. You'll notice that the textures aren't exactly correct compared to the aircraft, and that's because I don't have alpha channels or any of this other important things you need for proper texturing in the Sims. So I'm still learning that program, so it'll be a while probably before those projects will come out, and then I also have to get permission from the creators. One of them doesn't have anything in their README about modifying their files, but I always like to double check and make sure that it's alright, because I obviously give credit to everyone whenever I would do a project like this. So like the Bell 412, this aircraft, the 212s that way, the DC-6 and DC-7s I've done have been that way. So I won't release aircraft to the public usually unless I have permission to by the authors, or it specifically says that it's okay to do it in their license agreements for their aircraft. So I'm not really going to go into much detail for the A26 or the AT802s because I really haven't done any work on them. I've been trying to focus all my energy on doing the DC4s. So yeah, hopefully, like I said, I might finish them sometime this week. And then I have to go through, since I've started so many and stopped so many times with them, there's probably things that I've omitted or forgot about, so I have to really go back through, and it might take a little bit longer once I'm completed repainting to make sure I didn't forget anything major. So But what I wanted to do here is do the startup procedure for the 212 so you can actually see it, and we'll take a flight up to Idlewild, which is, if you can see up here, these actually in this mountain range of the San Bernardino National Forest. Up in this direction, we'll be flying to Keenwild Heli Attack Base, which is the base that I created, which is an actual U.S. Forest helibase that was created in San Bernardino National Forest. So it was hard for me to actually. I'm trying to branch into scenery design as well. I mean, I'm nowhere near as good as Jeremy is. He's the one that's created Hemet from scratch, essentially. My little helibase that I created is just basic, I think, things that I would consider basic from Airport Design Editor. So it naturally flattens ground polygons and things like that, so you can actually put a base or anything in elevated terrain, like in the mountains or anything like that. It actually creates ground polygons to level the ground automatically, which makes things a lot easier when you're trying to, say, like I said, make a base in the mountains somewhere. So once we fire this up, we'll kind of fly up in that direction. And there's a couple other things that I'm going to probably rant about, quote unquote rant about in here. I kind of wanted to talk about Australia, and there's been a lot of talk and discussions and even some arguments on a lot of these air tanker forums I'm on, to try and kind of stay up on things that are going on in that area and in the industry in general. But there's a lot of air tanker related questions that I kind of wanted to address, so that if people don't necessarily know, or it's just what I consider what would be basic, well, I wouldn't say basic knowledge, but it's just kind of giving insight more into the industry and why things are the way they are. And and I was also going to talk about how difficult it is to get even these large air tankers and VLAS down to Australia to begin with, and why aircraft like, say, the 747 aren't down there right now. So yeah, any more to that, we will jump into firing this bird up. So we'll go ahead and switch our inverters on to make sure that we have power to all our avionics. Generators are on, and make sure that our fuel, we turn our fuel pumps on. And all our fuel is on. Go ahead and close this. Make sure that our engine RPMs are set to spool, and we will go ahead and start this bird up. I guess it would help if I had the sound actually turned up on my machine so you could hear it. Start engine 2. Close the doors, and we'll actually bring up the GPS, and we'll type in Keenwild's designator that I created, and we'll fly right there. It'll be about a 10-minute flight. part here to the south. We're out of the heading out of the pattern at Hemet. And as we go that direction, we will be slowly climbing to altitude. Keenwild Helibase is actually about, I think it's about 4,500 feet in the sort of mid elevations of the San Bernardino National Forest. Keenwild has had a fire station in that area for years or decades, but Keenwild Helibase has not been around for very long. Keenwild itself has always had, well, at least in recent times, has always had one helicopter based up there. For a while, it's a Bell 407 with a external tank on it, and they use it for observation, rescues, and obviously firefighting up in the mountainous areas of the San Bernardino National Forest. Because before, the only nearest base to San Bernardino National Forest was Hemet and San Bernardino. And even though it says San Bernardino National Forest, which encompasses this whole area out in front of me here, all the way out to the area just to the south of Palm Springs, and it goes all the way out to all the way out this way towards Anza Borrego. But yeah, like I was saying, the only bases around were Hemet and San Bernardino, which are both still a considerable distance. So the U.S. Forest Service decided to put a helibase up in the mountains here for rescue operations. There's a lot of hikers and injuries that happen in these mountains, and Helicopter 301, which is a helicopter based at Hemet from CAL FIRE, actually every year has dozens of hoist rescues and things up in this area from all over San Bernardino National Forest, not including anywhere else in Riverside County. And if you guys don't know about Riverside County is one of the largest counties in the country. It literally spans almost the entire width of California. There's only a small stretch that doesn't touch the ocean because Orange County is there, but it literally goes from Orange County all the way to the California-Arizona border. But yeah, that's another reason why they put another helicopter up in this area, is to help break up some of that use, because if 301, for example, is on a fire for CAL FIRE and they need a hoist rescue, they have to call it in from some other county or jurisdiction, and it takes even longer for help to come. Somehow our generator got switched off. It's not a good thing. So yeah, once we get up to Keenwild, I will kind of get a general lay of the land here around this area. This area is actually very, very fire prone. When I lived in Hemet, there is fires in this area all around here. A couple of really large fires have actually happened in this area over this way. They've burned for weeks. But that's another reason why Hemet is one of the busiest air tanker bases in the country, if not the world. Between all the fires that happen in this part of the interior part of California, plus they cover so much area that it's no wonder that they're one of the busiest bases. The visual model of both of these helicopters, the 412 and the 212, are really good, and they still look good even in P3D. But yeah, as I was saying, once we get up to Keenwild here, I'll land and I'll show you the shutdown procedures for the 212, which is, you know, very simple. But I want to show you the realistic speed at which the rotors slow down and all that. But once we get up to Keenwild, I will kind of talk about you know, Australia, and then from there I will reveal the next tanker project, and we'll do some previews of the DC-4s, just kind of a quick visual walk around, if you will, and that'll pretty much conclude what this episode is. It might run a little bit longer than past ones, but realistically it's just because I've got a lot of new things that I'm introducing, plus I'm also flying, so that also by itself adds extra time. So we're flying up into the Idlewild area of the San Bernardino National Forest, and that's where Keenwild is. It's near the city of Idlewild, and it's closer to Mountain Center, which is a lower elevation city in the mountains here. Idlewild, the city itself, is actually higher up in the mountains, but Idlewild is technically where Keenwild Station is. You can see off to our left here is Keenwild Station. We'll kind of do a little bit of an orbit here, and we'll come around and we'll land. Keenwild's not very big. It has a 3 helipad helibase. I believe they have, you know, they have barracks, small cafeteria, and, you know, barracks for the crews for the helicopter that are stationed up here, and that's really basically it. It's not a very very large facility, but it does what it needs to. The real hard part for me will be trying to land on these little helipads. I am not a very experienced helicopter pilot. Rotary wing is not my, not really my area when it comes to piloting abilities. Well, at least we're on the helipad. I'll go ahead and straighten this out a little bit. People are a little bit OCD maybe, but oh jeez, forgive me. Alright, we'll just call it good there. Bring up our fuel. Oops. Go ahead and throttle down. This is what we'll do here. The rotor RPMs come down. But yeah, this is essentially Keenwild Helibase. I had to base all the images really off of satellite images because there's not a lot of photos of the actual base itself. But as you can hear, the rotor RPMs have slowed down considerably. Now I will be looking for different sounds to use for this, as these are actually the Saracen Bell 212 sounds, which obviously I can't release as freeware with a freeware helicopter like this. Go ahead and shut down. And close up here. Go ahead and close, turn off our inverters, generators. But as you can hear, the rotors are obviously slowing down fairly realistically, which is really great work because there's not many aircraft that actually do that. George Arana, who provided me with these files to do this, did a great job in coding that. And if you don't want to sit and wait for the rotors to actually slow down all the way, you can actually increase the collective power, like I'm doing right now, and it will actually slow the rotors down quicker. And then it takes a very long time for them to actually slow down completely and stop, even after that. But so go ahead and we'll kill the sound here for a little bit, the background sounds. But kind of what I wanted to talk about with the with Australia, and there's a lot of there's a lot of controversy and things of that nature that are floating around out there about what needs to be done. And in Australia, at least with their air program, as I understand it, their ground program needs work as well. But that's obviously not my area. But from what I understand, a lot of the experts and fire officials down in Australia are saying that they have a huge problem with infrastructure, and they have a problem with supporting even the aircraft that are over there currently. So not only do they have trouble refilling these large air tankers, but the VLATs that are there. For those that don't know, there are 2 DC-10 VLATs in Australia. They actually have a hard time refilling all those aircraft. So their issue is that they don't have a system that can, support aircraft, So that's something that needs to be addressed in their realm before they really do anything. Now it kind of brings about the thing is like, well, what should they do as far as an air program goes? Now this is just opinion based on from me. I am by no means an expert, but I have been around a little while, so I kind of understand what I consider basic knowledge of how our system here works, and at least what it worked in California, which is what I'm going to be basing this example off of. Now, people that aren't aware, CAL FIRE has its own air program. California Department of Forestry, or CAL FIRE as it's known, has 23 S2T initial attack air tankers, and they've got 12 helicopters and a number of OV-10 air tactical aircraft that they use for bird dog, which you know as bird dog aircraft or lead air attack aircraft. They have several of those as well. I don't know the exact number, but I believe it's 12 or 15, or there's several. There's a lot of them. So California has a number of bases, strategically positioned bases throughout the entire state, that they can essentially attack any fire that erupts within 20 or 30 minutes from any of these bases in the entire state. So one of the reasons why California, being as fire prone as it is, doesn't have these huge fires very often. You do have firestorms when you combine certain weather conditions, which is ironically what happens a lot down in Australia. They have similar conditions that are like the Santa Ana winds that Southern California gets. But when these fires break out in California, these bases, either the U.S. Forest Service bases or the state bases, will get aircraft dispatched from them to put out those fires, or at least try to corral them so they don't spread. So in the cases of Hemet, which would be my area of expertise, since that's where I live and I saw them operate every year, several times a year, the way that would work is they would be dispatched to a fire. So out of Hemet, they would launch the helicopter 301. They'd launch the 2 S2Ts, which are 7.2 and 7.3. And they would launch along with the OV-10. The OV-10 would get overhead and they would do a quick survey of the fire, and they would, a lot of times, they would request additional tankers nearly immediately from Ramona or bases up north from Porterville or Paso Robles. And the thing of it is that those bases really, as a crow flies, aren't that far from Hemet. And that's kind of how a lot of the bases are in general for CAL FIRE. They're only maybe a few hundred miles from each other or less. So in the case of Hemet, for example, being as busy of a base as it is, they routinely call in tankers from those two northern bases and Ramona. Ramona being the first choice because it's the closest base to Hemet. It's only a few, I believe it's not very far. I'm not sure exactly the air distance. I could actually, let me look it on the GPS. I want to say it's about 40 miles as a crow flies from Hemet, but I could be wrong. It might be a little bit further than that, but let's find out. Ramona. So it's about 40 miles from this position that we are here. So about 45 or 50 miles from Hemet. So what happens is that they will take off, and by the time our tankers from Hemet are either finishing their first drop or on their way back to Hemet, tankers from Ramona are already showing up on this same fire. So within a period of an hour, theoretically, Hemet could have 6 or more aircraft in less than an hour period called in to fight one fire to keep it from getting big. Or they can at least put a perimeter around it for help it from spreading in a short amount of time. And then you have San Bernardino Air Tanker Base, which is further to the north of here. They can send large air tankers if they need it. And San Bernardino can also support the DC-10, and 747 if they decided to use that. But that is kind of the system in which I think Australia needs to incorporate a strong initial attack initiative type system, where you have helicopters and initial attack based aircraft like the S2T, for example. The S2T would be perfect for Australia because a lot of their runways aren't very long, kind of like interior California, Hemet being an example of that, where the runways are under 5,000 feet. Some of them are 4,000 feet like Hemet's are. And the S2T's got reversible propeller capable turboprops, and it carries 1,200 gallons, which is more than the single engine air tankers that they have in Australia. So the S2T would be a perfect platform if they were to convert a few to, say, into for an air program down there. That would be a great aircraft to choose. But you incorporate that with any other rotary wing assets that they already have down there, which are very similar to what we have in the U.S. already. They have the Huey platform, sky cranes, a lot of other heavy helicopters, and medium helicopters. But incorporating a program like that, where you have a bunch of these small bases, you have 2 or 3 or so of these air tankers and an air attack platform based in those small areas, they can get to these fires that pop up, and they can either knock them down with direct attack or put enough perimeter around them so ground crews can get there and put out the rest of the fire. Or, like I said, they can do direct attack and put it out themselves. But these smaller bases, the closer they are to these fires, the more good they're going to do. Large air tankers have their place, but the problem is that the bigger aircraft you get, that also limits the amount of areas that they can operate out of. So, for example, in Australia, to my knowledge, you have a few bases that can operate these large tankers. So, like, you have like the C-130s, 737s, the DC-10s, all have to return to the same base, and they have to fly several hundred miles in order to reload and then come back. So you have a lot of downtime where you're not putting any retardant around the fire because you have to wait for them to fly all the way there and all the way back. So if you have these smaller airports that it can be closer to fires, you can get these aircraft, they can deliver nearly the same amount of retardant in some cases as the VLATs, and the time it takes for the VLATs to fly, or the large air tankers to fly all the way back to those bigger bases to reload and come back. So you can get, you can still put down, maybe not as much as a VLAT, but still you can still put down a considerable amount with smaller tankers. So having an entire fleet of large air tankers isn't necessarily a good thing. You need a mix of aircraft in there to break up the lulls in between putting perimeter around fires, because you need aircraft around to do structure protection and ground support of firefighters and all that. So that's why large air tankers are part of the toolbox. They're not like an end-all be-all tool. Like there's a lot of discussion going around on a lot of these forums that, oh well, Australia has a bunch of these surplus Qantas, I guess, 747s. They're like, why doesn't the government just buy 6 of these and convert them into air tankers, into super tankers, like the 747 super tanker? Well, funny story about the 747 super tanker. If you don't know anything about it, the 747 as a super tanker has been around since around 2004, 2005. That's how long it's been around for. It's gone through 2 other previous iterations before the version you see now. And before that version, those 2 versions were owned by a company called Evergreen. They're the ones who designed and built the tanks. And ironically, the tank that is actually in the super tanker now was actually from the first jet that they built back in 2006. It was a modular-based, pallet-based tank that they actually built on pallets to make it more, they can easily move it and things like that. The second 747 super tanker that they built was a lighter all aluminum tank, and it was permanently affixed to the 747. So that system didn't stay around, but the modular system did, and that's what's in the new super tanker. But that system, as I understand, Evergreen spent $40 million in research and development on that tank. And to what I understand, over the years of using it, the tank has been found to be, it has its quirks, and it makes it so that the system isn't that great, really. It was designed to carry 20,000 gallons of retardant, but as the system has been around and aged and used, they found that the system, since it's pressurized, can't expel the last 1,000 gallons or so of retardant in the tank. So they've had to limit the amount it carries to 19,000 gallons, which is no slouch by any means. That's literally twice what the DC-10s carry. But the problem with the pressurized tank systems and why you don't see them used very much, or hardly at all, really. Only the MAF styles, or the MAF C-130s, are the only other aircraft currently in service that use a pressurized system. But the reason why they don't use them is because they're complicated, and they're good for close-in structure protection, because when you pressurize retardant, the particles or the droplets that come out of the drop system are much finer, so they disperse better, so you can use them closer to structures and things like that. Now there's kind of some controversy in whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and they're saying, well, the added weight of the retardant kind of negates the fact of being able to get through thicker brush and things of that nature. Well, realistically, the 747 carries so much retardant on board that if it had to, it could literally double down on the same drop if that was a problem, but we don't see it doing that. It obviously works just fine when it comes to coverage levels for the retardant. But the problem with the 747 is that gigantic pressurized tank that it uses needs a special kind of high-powered air compressor, which I understand is super hard to get. And it's not like any place can get it. There's only a few places, I guess, that have them, and if they don't have them, they literally have to find one and ship it to where the 747 is. And that's what the problem was early on with the 747s whenever they first entered service with Evergreen, is that it was such a new platform, and so it was experimental, obviously, that these air compressors were hard to come by, and they had to ship it wherever because they didn't have one. So that's kind of limits to where the 747 could operate. Plus, being a 747, they're huge. Yeah, I mean, a DC-10 is a huge jet, but a 747 is even bigger. So you're talking about, you have to have a base that's big enough to handle a 747 Plus, you have to be able to find one of these air compressors in order to pressurize this gigantic system that it has. Imagine how much, I don't know what the exact operating pressure is of this, but imagine how much pressure it probably takes to pressurize a tank to push out 19,000 gallons worth of retardant. Now, if you don't know anything about fire retardant, water weighs about 10 pounds per gallon, I believe it is, or so. Fire retardant weighs more than that because of all the chemicals and additives that they put in it. So that just adds how much weight is actually in this tank and all this pressure that has to push it out. Out of these nozzles out of the back of the 747, which I believe there's 4 or 5 nozzles in the back that it uses. It squirts the retardant out at varying degrees. So that's why a lot of gravity-fed systems are used, is because they're easier and less complicated. It's literally a hydraulically powered door that controls how much retardant falls out of the system, and it has. But anyway, we're getting off tangent. But the 747s. That's what type of system they use. There's no external tank modification for them. That's all internal. So if somebody, let's say Australia, was going to try and do that, they would have to design their own tanks, which, let's get that straight, Evergreen, like I said, back in early 2000, spent $40 million to do that, to get the first tank designed, built, installed, and certified to use. So if they were to do that, they have to spend at least that much money just to design the tank. That doesn't even count on how much it costs to acquire all those jets. Now, I don't know if anybody knows, but what a used 747 costs. A used one, not a new one, a used one. It is a lot of money. So you couple that, let's say you wanted to do all 6 of those, you have to take that much money, combine it, and then the amount of money for research and development. Then you have to consider maintenance. Maintaining a jet that big is the reason it's super expensive. There's a reason why you have an entire, you have like several hundred people just to take care of one jet in the airline companies. So you have to worry about that, and then you have to worry about the size of the jet. So, just to give you an example, a 747, just the wings. If you were to just take into account the wing size of a 747, the wing area of a 747 is over 5,000 square feet. Just let that sink in. Just the wings. If you were to make a box around the 747, nose to tail, wingtip to wingtip, a box, it's almost 50,000 square feet. Now let that sink in. So if you have more than 2 of those on the ground at one time at one of these air bases, what else are you going to have room to reload? And not to mention how long it takes to reload 20,000 gallons, plus recharge a pressurized tank. So then you start to sit there and think about adding up all of these things and go, gee, maybe it's not such a good idea to spend that much money on just these jets. And that's just the reloading part. We're not talking about having to deal with them in the air. Because whenever VLATs are in the air, and you're in a crowded airspace with firefighting aircraft, the entire airspace literally has to be cleared when a VLAT comes in because of how big they are. You have to move all the helicopters, all the other fixed wing aircraft has to be out of the area in order for that thing to come in and drop. For safety. But like I said, they have their place in the toolbox, but they are not the end all be all answer like some people seem to think they are. Bigger isn't always better. In this industry, you need many tools to do the job. So that's kind of like an insight into kind of what I think. I think they should have a CAL FIRE based initial attack system. You get a bunch of these bases, several small air tankers, maybe some large ones thrown in there. These smaller bases all over the place in these fire-prone areas of, in eastern Australia, for example, and the northwest or New South Wales and Victoria and those areas have a bunch of bases up and down the east coast of Australia, just like CAL FIRE does in California. And you have all these bases that you can pull resources from to put out these small fires before they merge into these gigantic super fires that we see burning down there. And that money that people are suggesting that the government in Australia, spend on these converting all these super tankers, They really should be spending it on creating a aerial firefighting infrastructure like Cal Fire has, and then getting their own fixed wing aircraft. Now they did permanently contract one of Coulson's 737s, which is all well and fine, but again, it's only one aircraft. They realistically need way more, and in the United States, we have over 100 air tankers that we can call in from government aircraft, government contracts to civilian operators and state-operated aircraft. There's hundreds we can call in. Plus, we have other countries can send stuff to us, like Canada, for example. So Australia needs an infrastructure like that, and they need more options. But you got to spend money in order to do that. And from my understanding, the political situation in Australia, that whole situation is going to be kind of a pain to kind of deal with, and just like anything political. And unfortunately, it seems like anymore governments and people in general aren't really proactive in dealing with things anymore. They're more reactionary, and that's kind of the problem that we're seeing in Australia. Is that couple that with bad forestry management, land management, kind of like what happens in the United States. You get situations where they could have been avoided because of essentially it boils down to bad politics and spending. But I don't want to get too political, but unfortunately in this industry, a lot of the good can be done has to come down to politics instead of the work that firefighters and all these people do. So that's what my opinion is. They should create an infrastructure for, at least at minimum, to have their own state-run aircraft like Cal Fire does. And then, maybe before they get all that, augmenting it with civilian contracted aircraft, like kind of how we do here in the United States. I'm sure Canada has something similar. They do contract from civilian operators as well for a lot of their firefighting efforts, like Buffalo Airways and Con Air, or companies like that. Wildcat, for example, like this one here. So yeah, and then speaking of the 747, the reason why the 747 isn't in Australia is simply the Australian government hasn't asked for it to come down there. There seems to be a lot of confusion I see out there running around that the operators here in the United States can't just ask the Australian government, hey, do you guys need some help? Well, we'll just send some aircraft down there for you. That's not how it works. And then there's other things out there saying that, oh, well, the U.S. government is preventing the 747 from going there. That's also not true. The U.S. government has no say in where civilian aircraft go. Granted, they were under government contract. These aircraft were, like the 747 and the DC-10s, are all under government contract at one point, but we're in the off-season in the United States right now. Once they're off government contract, the civilian operators can do what they want with them. So that rumor, or whatever you want to call it, floating around that the U.S. government is telling global supertanker that they can't leave the country and go down to Australia isn't true. That's just not how it works. How it does work, though, in order for the 747 to, say, leave Australia or Arizona, where it's currently at, where it does its seasonal maintenance, it's actually been sitting in southern Arizona, which it does every off-season since, I believe, November when it came off contract. It flew a lot this season, so they did maintenance on it, like they do every year, but it took a little bit longer because it flew a lot more. So it's just been sitting there. And they've even said they've been in contact with the Australian government, but the Australian government hasn't asked for their help. And that's likely because of the situation that I talked about a little bit earlier, that they don't really have the infrastructure to support the aircraft that they have over there already. And like I said, they've got two DC-10s over there. So if they have trouble even loading those two jets, imagine something that carries twice as much as those coming into a base like Richmond or something like that and takes up that much space. They're going to have problems, which is probably why they're hesitant in bringing it over, aside from maybe the cost aspect of it too. So what happens is that the Australian government has to ask for help, and then they have to set up a contract with that company, like Global Supertanker. And then once the contract is approved, then the aircraft will leave. Well, they'll prep the aircraft for it to leave the United States and fly down there. And this kind of segues into what actually entails flying that far. And so we'll kind of get into that. We'll be changing aircraft here in a second. So yeah, now we hopped over to San Bernardino and kind of give you a sneak peek of the Tanker 15, one of the DC-4s that I'm working on, getting closer to getting done. But, like I was saying, the difficulty in getting aircraft down to Australia, it's quite a feat in it by itself. Now, ironically, all of our aircraft, I'm pretty sure all of our large air tankers actually have the range to be able to get down to Australia. But the issue is with that is that they have the range, but if you look at the trip at which they have to take, it's quite a trip to try and do. Even if you look at the DC-10s, which is the largest aircraft that could feasibly make that trip. So if you look, I looked this up the other day, as a matter of fact, just to double check my facts here. So if they were to say take the DC-10 from, say, San Bernardino and fly all the way down to Sydney, they can't even do that on a single trip. I think a lot of people probably don't realize how far Australia actually is. And they're like, oh, well, we can just fly jets down there. Yeah, you could do that, but do you realize how far that actually is? So when you're talking about the DC-10, the largest and probably most fuel, carries the most fuel of any of the VLATs, or any of the air tankers in general, it takes the DC-10 2 days to get down there. 2 days. That's without flying across the international date line where they lose an extra day because of that. So how far is that exactly? So I will bring up this and we'll look. So this is just a basic flight planner that I use on Flight Simulator. It's free. So if you were to take off from San Bernardino and fly direct, mind you, direct, to Sydney, it is roughly 6,575 nautical miles. Okay? 6,575 nautical miles. That's far. So if we go down to the map here, this is what the flight would look like across however many waypoints there are. I think there's, what do they say, 26? 26 waypoints. That's if you flew direct, all the way out there. Which none of the aircraft that we're going to talk about can actually do that. So, including the DC-10. The DC-10 can't even do this. So even the DC-10s, even in their stripped down state that they are, with no commercial seating or cargo or anything, they're literally just flying over there, full of fuel, no retardant, anything. It's literally basic things on board and fuel, and obviously the retardant tank. But everything else is empty on the DC-10 when they fly out there. So I read somewhere that they got a range of around, I think, 6,000 miles, which still 6,000 miles is not not anywhere near that, or not. I mean, it's close, but you're still 575 nautical miles short, which is further than a regular mile. So what they end up doing, I actually watched or looked at their on FlightAware. You can actually look up their tail numbers of the tankers that flew over there. You can actually see the route that they took. So in terms of the DC-10s, they flew from, I don't remember where they started in the U.S. I want to say they started, I don't think they started at San Bernardino. I think they started, where did they start? Santa Barbara? I don't think they flew directly from Albuquerque, which is their home base. But anyway, they flew from somewhere in California. They flew all the way out to Honolulu International on the island of Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands. Then they flew all the way down here into the Marshall Islands in the South Pacific. All the way down here. And this is where they stopped for their second fuel stop. And then from there, they flew down from the Marshall Islands, and they flew down into Sydney. That took 2 days. And I don't think that accounts for the time change. It might not, but still, it takes that entire trip to come down there in the 730 or in the DC-10. I'm not sure the other aircraft took a similar route. Colson 737s might have done a similar route. Actually, no, I take that back. I don't know if they could have. I'd have to look at them, but I did just look at the DC-10s just to look. But the other aircraft, say like the MD-80s or MD-87s that Ericsson sent over, or the C-130s, they might be able to fly to Honolulu and down, but I don't know if they did or not. The only other option would be to fly north across British Columbia and the Northwest Territories of Canada into Alaska and island hop from the Aleutians down through Japan down here, and then down across here in the Philippines, New Guinea, maybe down this way, like I said, to New Guinea or the Philippines or Indonesia or wherever, and then down. I know they did something similar to that, because I remember them talking about the Ericsson MD-87s having delayed because there was a volcanic eruption down here in the Philippines. Mount Taal, I think it was erupting down here in the Philippines, and the ash column was actually drifting through their flight path. And if you know anything about volcanic ash, aircraft can't fly anywhere near volcanoes because of the ash ingestion issue that would exist in the engines. But yeah, so that's something similar. I believe that's what the MD-87s did. They might have come up and down across this way. I don't think they flew directly across the Pacific to Hawaii. They might have. They might have flown there and then to Japan and then down. They could have done that too, I think. I'm not exactly sure, because a lot of those firefighting aircraft are actually stripped down passenger versions. So if those aircraft could make it out there in their commercial flights, they could do that now, stripped down. But whether they push it or not, I'm not exactly sure. So that would consist more research on my part. But yeah, that's what we're talking about here. So you're talking days to get down there. And then what type of fatigue you're talking about? The pilots having to fly all that distance all the way down there just to get down here to Australia and fight, then to start fighting all these fires. So that's quite a feat. I actually saw a post not long ago from, I think, Plane Savers, where they're actually talking about how difficult would it be for them to take their fleet of, or a DC-4, for example, from their base in Yellowknife, which I want to say that's up in this area of Northwest Territory. It's in this area somewhere here in Canada. And how hard would they say would it be for them to fly to Australia from up here? And they essentially said that it wouldn't be that difficult to actually do it, because there's a lot of places to stop in that distance. And that's how they used to do it back in the day when they were flying these, for TWA and all that type of stuff. They used to do all these island hopping type routes in order to get to these far, like, exotic places like the Philippines or wherever. That's how they used to do it. So their problem was that they actually had their biggest issue, they said, was to get their aircraft airworthy. Because if you don't know about their DC-4 fleet, they've been sitting for years now, and they're actually sitting at their quote-unquote boneyard in, I think it's Hay River, Northwest Territory. So, but yeah, if they were still around and still flyable, they could do it too. Even the DC-7s that Ericsson has, theoretically speaking, if they wanted to, they could fly them that far, because the DC-7 has a range of about 5,500 miles. So that's actually pretty good for a piston engine airplane, if you think about it. 5,500 miles to the DC-7 could fly. So they could theoretically do this route to Honolulu, because it used to do it. Back when it was in service in the 50s, it would fly out to Honolulu. So they could fly it that far, but obviously they're older and they won't be doing that. That's why they sent their MD-87s and not the DC-7s. So, but yeah, that kind of goes along with how far is it exactly, and the logistics of what you're talking about are gigantic. So that's why they won't be sending, say Cal Fire wanted to help out, there's no way they could get their S2Ts down there. Or Canada could send CL-415s, no way. They couldn't fly them there. Or more seats, single engine air takers, they couldn't do that either. There's no way. You'd have to literally strip them down, take them apart, put them on a container ship, and ship them by boat across the Pacific. That's the only way to get them to Australia, those aircraft that size. Same thing with helicopters. You definitely can't fly a helicopter that far either. You got to strip them down like they do, put them in containers, and they ship them across the ocean that way. That's how Wildcat got their helicopters over there from Canada. They literally put them in containers, sealed them up, and shipped them all the way down to Australia on a boat. And then they reassembled them once they got there. So yeah. So now we'll get back into get back into the sim. I wanted to try and kind of skip through these fast since I've been talking so much. But as you can see, these repaints are coming along good. I still need some work. Still needs to do some work on them. But they do look decent. The nose needs to get fixed on these because this black, the anti-glare stripe on the nose here doesn't come down this far. I also need to do some more adjustments on some of this other stuff on this plane. But hopefully those will be done soon. But the aircraft that I did want to show everybody, now that we are at San Bernardino, I will now unveil the aircraft that I've been working on. And here it is. This is the aircraft I've been working on. As you can see, it is the DC-10 VLAT from Tanker Air Carrier. This is actually a conversion done to Eric Cantu's DC-10. This originally was, I think, in FS 2004 version, but the commercial version was converted by Chris Evans, which anyone knows he does a bunch of he does a bunch of P3D conversions from older aircraft. He puts new cockpits and things like that in them and does some other modifications. Well, I took his version of this jet and did a tank for it, and then scaled it, and it's got a rough paint job on it right now. As you see, it doesn't exactly match, but I am trying to work and see if I can get this publicly released, because I really hope so, because there is a FSX AI version that someone had tried to get done, but if you compare it to this one, the control surfaces don't work, and there's a lot of other issues with it. It isn't scaled properly, and this, that, and the other. But with this one, I have done other modifications to it. The centerline gear, I actually removed the animations for, and removed it, obviously, because in the real jets, the center gear obviously doesn't work, because the tank is there. So I had to do the same exact modifications on this when I put the tank on it. So the tank is still a work in progress. I still haven't figured out how to do a lot of this stuff in Gmax yet, but hopefully that'll come along as I learn. But this is what I've been working on. So hopefully I can release this to the public, because I think this would make a great addition, because this aircraft is kind of iconic with aerial firefighting right now, because it's like it's been used so much, and there's 4 of them now. So a lot of people in Australia have seen them. Obviously here in the US, people have seen them all over the place. So I kind of wanted to get this represented, as it's a kind of an icon in aerial firefighting at this current time, especially with people in Australia. I'm sure it's kind of like an angel, so to speak. It's like you see this coming in, and you're like, oh, we're going to be okay, because it's going to lay down a bunch of retardant. But yeah, so that's one thing that I'm working on. Like I said, hopefully I can get this one publicly released. Now, there isn't anything in the README about him saying not to modify his aircraft and things like that, but I always want to check with him first. So I'm going to try and get in contact with him and see if it's all right to release this, like I did with the DC-7s, and like I'm doing with the Bell 412s and all that. So there's that, and then I will go ahead and jump into the P61 project too. I'll show you the tank on that as well. And then this is the P61 project. This one too, I have to try and get in contact with the creator of this, and try and get maybe this publicly released as well. You can see the conformal tank that I put on it. Now I did try and see if I could remove the fuel tanks rather, and I can't seem to remove them. They're like embedded more in the model than most of these other models are, so unfortunately those are going to have to stay on there, as well as these oil cooling vents, I think they are. From all the reference photos that I've seen of Tanker 35, it didn't have these on there, so I don't know if they were removed, or this particular version that they modified for Air Tanker didn't have them, or what they did exactly to modify them. I know some of them, the propellers were actually off of the P61 and not the ones on the reporters. So Um, yeah, so trying to get this one out would be another one I'll try and work with at the DC-10, but no guarantees. If anything, I will at least just get the repaint out. The tank situation may or may not come about. Kind of same thing with the DC-10. If I can't maneuver around that, getting that out, then I will at least do the repaint for it. I'll probably do the fleet of them, tanker 910, 911, 912, and 914. I'll do the repaints for them and probably release those in a pack. But if I do get to go ahead and release the tanked version, once I finally get the texturing situation sorted out with that, and we'll kind of go from there. But these are both background projects, if you want to call it. So these are the ones that I've been kind of working on to break up the monotony of just constantly repainting stuff. So I've got the 412, the 212, both the tank versions for the P61 and the DC-10 I'm working on in the background of the repaints. So at some points it may not seem like it's pretty quiet, but I guarantee you I am working on something, because I have a backlog that'll keep me busy for probably a couple of months, as I said before. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll try and I'm going to try and get these maybe to move over to YouTube, because trying to keep these, well, if they end up being as long as this one's going to end up being, YouTube's probably a better platform, because trying to upload this to Facebook is probably not the best choice. Facebook has a tendency to downgrade video quality and all that. So I may actually create a separate channel for simulated air tanker operations. I don't know if I want to throw this on my regular YouTube channel that I have, because it's pretty specific. I could, that way, actually that's probably what I'll end up doing, because that way I can post developmental videos and things like that aren't just updates. They'll just be flight test videos of tankers, and just random other videos of doing air tanker stuff, and kind of like air tanker news related information, instead of doing, I think this video is going to be over a half hour long, easy probably, if I keep all the flying in. So yeah, thanks for watching, and if these keep interest, then I'll keep doing them. So thanks again.